This is a gazelle and her young carved from a single piece of ebony wood. I got it in the Ivory Coast. The Ivorian carvers have long been known for their beautiful work in wood, and pieces like this can be seen in museums all around the world. Originally, every village in the Ivory Coast had a wood carver, and the statuettes and the masks had some religious or personal significance. Today, the carving is done primarily for the tourist trade. An apprentice in a woodcarver's shop can learn a lot from the master carver. This shop is in Bouaké, the second largest city of the Ivory Coast. Here, the master carver is starting with a solid piece of teak. It will become a mask. The master carver was traditionally one of the most important people of the village. The apprentice is working with mahogany, the first rough chiselings of a pair of gazelles like mine. Someday he may be a master carver and pass on this traditional art to an apprentice of his own. As the wood sculptures take more definitive shapes, the work becomes more delicate and refined. The designs may be ancient, and pieces such as this would once have been carved for personal use, but today the carvers make their pieces to be sold to tourists. Bouaké is the textile and fabric center of the Ivory Coast. The methods of weaving and the foot-powered looms have not changed much over generations. Tremendously long strands of colored threads from large spools are drawn into the loom inch by inch. There they are woven into a variety of patterns, creating bolts of cloth. Even though fancy French and Dutch fabrics can be found right across the street, many of the Bali people prefer these traditional colors and patterns. Every village used to have its potter, or ceramist. In our village of Irakro, there is one woman who carries on the tradition. Her method of making pots and bowls is the ancient coil method. Her clay is carefully selected for its durability, and her pots are fired in a kiln. Years ago, she supplied her village with virtually all cooking vessels and water jars. Today, metal and plastic pots from France can be purchased in the market. There is less and less need for earthenware, and there is little work left for the village potter. Perhaps she continues because there are still some in the village who buy her pots for special occasions. After all, they're more than just dishes and pitchers and bowls. They're Bali art, and there will always be someone who wants to buy a work of art. The cultural traditions of Japan are well preserved and maintained. This famous landmark of Osaka, the Osaka Castle, represents the shogunate period of Japan in the 16th century. Today, Sunday, daughter Michio joins the Nakayama family for a tour of the castle. Sunday is the day for Japanese families to try to be together. Hideyoshi Toyotomi, the warrior who built Osaka Castle 400 years ago, represents a famous period in Japanese history, the Age of the Samurai, which was a time when Japanese culture was ruled by powerful shoguns who fought for control of Japanese culture. The castle is filled with displays of battle regalia, even a battle mask to turn a warrior's horse into a fierce dragon. Next door to Osaka Castle is the Osaka City Museum, which has a colorful display of bunraku puppets. Hiroaki and his best friend Atsushi Nakajima visit the puppet exhibit. They have seen bunraku puppet plays before, but have never seen the puppets up close. It takes up to 3 people to manipulate some of the puppets, which are half-life size. The display hall also presents a bunraku puppet play on video cassette. Here, Hiroaki can learn how the puppeteers manipulate the dolls and give them voices. At the Osaka Municipal Art Museum, the Nakayamas can see priceless examples of Japanese painting, ancient and modern. These screens from 1610 were once used in the home of a wealthy merchant. Each panel depicts a domestic or wild animal in subtle and delicate brushstrokes. Japanese art was patterned after Chinese art. This Chinese scroll from 1404 shows the techniques and themes borrowed by the Japanese. This 300-year-old Japanese painting is called Bizinzu, or Pretty Lady. Japanese art often looks as though you could feel the textures, like the fur on the three mice. This is a modern painting called Late Autumn. The lady is patching her screen with paper snowflakes. This peacock was painted 150 years ago. The brilliant greens and blues are just as vivid today as the feathers of a real peacock. One of the traditional arts of Japan is a living art, the Japanese garden, designed to have something blooming in every season. This is the Nakayama's garden. The traditional stone lantern is an example of a part of Japanese culture which has not changed over 1,000 years, nor has the Japanese love for the color which flowers bring to the garden. Flowers indoors are very important to the Japanese. Grandmother Yuasa teaches a class in Ikebana. Ikebana goes back to the 6th century, when the offering of flowers to Buddha in the temples was an integral part of the daily ritual. Her students hope to learn the laws of form in art as they produce fine qualities of linear perspective. The students' appreciation of Grandmother Yuasa's expertise is quite evident as they present their finished arrangements. The Japanese pursuit of perfection is well exemplified by the tea ceremony. Again, Grandmother Yuasa is the teacher of a class of young women who want to learn all the graceful and pleasing movements required by the formal tea ceremony. There is only one correct way to pour the steaming water. Only one correct way to stir the tea. Traditional emphasis on concentration and self-control make the tea ceremony symbolic of Japanese culture. This ceremony is an ancient one and much revered by the Japanese. Teachers like Grandmother Yuasa preserve those things which make her culture unique in a time when the temptation is to adopt Western ways. Most of the Japanese music you have heard on this series has been performed on the koto. This is a koto. It has 13 strings, which are plucked with the thumb and first and second fingers. Mrs. Miyuki Yoshikami is a koto player. She's carrying on a tradition which began with men only. The koto came to Japan from China. The Japanese adopted it and adapted it to give it a uniquely Japanese sound. Cultural adaptation has created many of the traditions of the Tarahumara Indians of Mexico. Jesus Moreno is making a violin. The Spanish settlers brought violins with them to Mexico. The Tarahumara liked the violins and soon were making their own. Now, after many generations, the Tarahumara have created their own version of a violin and the music to play on it. Andreas watches as Jesus carves the bottom of a box of a new violin. Andreas would like to become a woodcarver himself. From Jesus, Andreas is learning about his own culture. He is learning that his people share a love for music and dance, and that he could learn from Jesus how to make violins and other musical instruments just as Jesus learned while watching when he was a boy. While the violin is a borrowed instrument, the rattle is strictly Tarahumara. The rattle is used in many dances. Jesus makes the violins and rattles for the musicians who accompany the most colorful of all Tarahumara dances, the Matachine dance. Marcos is the youngest of the Matachine dancers of Caborachi. For him, it is a high honor to be allowed to dance with the men. Piece by piece, Marcos dons his dance costume, a beaded headdress, a cape, and an assortment of scarves. Marcos has been taught the steps and the movements of the dance by the older men. They realize that young dancers will keep this tradition alive. Marcos is now ready for the dance. 2 rows of dancers follow the cues of a lead dancer, the monarco. The monarco directs the dancers to turn, switch sides, and follow in line. The musicians repeat the same basic chords over and over. 3 chanters stand to the side. They are called chapeons, and they shout whenever the 2 rows of dancers switch sides. The dance lasts about an hour, and spectators gather to watch. When early Spanish settlers saw the Indians doing this dance, they were reminded of a similar dance in southern Spain, so they gave the Indian dance the same name as that of the Spanish dance, the Matachine. The chanters wear white face masks on the backs of their heads. The masks symbolize their importance as chapeons, or directors of the dance. So the Baule of the Ivory Coast find new outlets for much of their cultural heritage through tourism. The Japanese struggle against westernization by holding on to 1,000-year-old rituals and practices. The Tarahumara developed their own versions of customs and artifacts introduced to them by the European settlers. These they add to their ancient traditions.